forget to do it. So always easier to trim off than add on. Hey, Lynn.
Yeah. Greetings, everybody.
Happy New Year to everyone.
To y'all too.
And just give people a couple more minutes. Actually got a pretty decent turnout. Don, you're popular. That's what it is.
It's that people can have nap time now that holidays are over.
Especially when I just finished a great dinner.
Oh, what'd you have?
Oh, I call it a great dinner. A sardine sandwich.
You enjoy that.
Yeah.
I'm glad this is remote.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sardine sandwich with a side of fresh green beans.
I forgot what comedian it was. So he's eating a sardine is like eating an eyebrow.
I can go for that.
I don't eat any seafood.
Oh, I love seafood.
No, I lived in Florida for so many years and people thought I was crazy for not eating fish. And I was like, nope. I did try it a couple of times. It just doesn't do anything for me.
But lobster showered in butter is like to die for.
So I've heard. That's John T's neck of the woods there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is.
Well, you have lobsters down there that just a different kind.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It tastes different too.
But the best lobster my wife and I have ever had, we stopped in a lobster pound up on the coast of Maine, just driving down the street. It had an outside deck with an overlook of a little harbor where the boats were coming in, and it was sunset.
Oh, beautiful.
Beautiful.
That was wonderful.
I remember going off of was it Isla Morada? That's like one of the first keys, right? Off of once you go down past Miami, and went out there to go deep sea fishing with some friends, and then we had an extra day, went snorkeling, and I guess it was like just before lobster season. They were, I mean, as far as the eye could see, you put your head underwater and they were just all over the place.
Oh my heavens.
So I guess it's not really a whole lot of, it doesn't take a whole lot of effort to catch them. I mean, you can pretty much just put your hand out and grab them.
It could be like deer season in Pennsylvania, though. The deer are everywhere until deer season opens, and then you can't find one to shoot.
Ron says, I'm on another meeting, so I'll be on mute. That's cool, as long as you're with us. Training for a Navy financial database.
Oh,
All right. That sounds exciting. Better you than me.
mm-mm.
All right. Well, I mean, we actually got a good turnout tonight, 10 folks. So thanks all for joining. I don't really have anything elaborate prepared. I will say though that you know, a couple of months ago, I was excited about announcing the golden packet would be in September, October timeframe, and then announced a date, and everybody started kind of groaning. And I think it was like about 3 days after that, somebody posted a picture of the top of what was it, Mount Washington was already all iced over. So I caved to peer pressure, and yeah, so we're back with July.
Yeah, had that been done in person, there may have been rotten tomatoes involved.
Yeah. Well, I can understand. I mean, and I forgot to check the let's see here. I went date to date calculator. So
And this change had absolutely nothing to do with the fact you might have been hiking up Katahdin with Tim with ice crampons
I don't
on?
know if I'm, yeah, I don't know if I'm going to be. I'll tell you what, so by the way, July 15th, according to timeanddate.com, is 186 days away. Which I think we all know too, that, in another month or so, the days are just going to be flying by. So I typically will start ramping up with the preparation towards the end of this month. So you'll probably start seeing a flurry of activity from me like around the end of this month, beginning of February, when I'll start kicking things off, and I'll also be looking for helpers this year, because I don't want to do it all myself. But in theory, it should be easier this year with all the stuff that I did last year. In any event, my plan is still to go to Katahdin with Tim. However, I looked at airfare, and I think you can fly to Europe for less than it would cost to go to Maine from Atlanta. It was over $900 round trip.
Can you get a cheap flight from Atlanta to Manchester, New Hampshire?
That was one of the options I looked at. That was about as inexpensive as it got, and that was around 700.
Oh, man, even booking that far ahead?
Yep. So I'm just going to keep an eye on it. So I'm not going to make a firm commitment that I'm going to be there, just because, finances. It's when I go up, I want to stay up there for a week, because I've got a friend that lives in South Portland, and I've got another friend that's in New Hampshire, around Portsmouth area. So I'd like to make it, more than just going up for Golden Packet, spend some time up there with my wife. So, but yeah, the intent is still there. I just don't know if I'll be able to make it happen. And I guess, I don't know, maybe next month we can talk about whether or not we're going to look at adding Stone Mountain, or maybe what is it, Overlook Mountain in Chattanooga. If we're going to entertain bringing additional sites on again this year, or just stick with tried and true. So just planting some seeds in everybody's head, so that we can just start mulling on it for a few weeks, and we'll talk about it at the next meeting. But I don't know, anybody have any questions for me? Okay. Well, without further ado, and I'm going to turn it over to Don, who has put together. Unfortunately, he had something come up at the last minute, so he was going to present for us in December, but was unable to at the last minute. So, Don, I just asked that you present it today, so I'll let you take over.
All right. Well, I put screen share up. Again, I apologize for December. We had a family event come up, and as my wife explained, I didn't really have an option. So that's the way it is. All right, so we're going to discuss the APRS Appliance status updates and next actions. It's basically a review of what we've done, but let's get everybody grounded. I'm going to leave this in edit mode, so if we decide to change things, we can, and that will become the final official documentation for the meeting. So this really got triggered because Kenwood started to discontinue the D710, D72, D74, and those have been the backbone of the AT Golden Packet tool set for many years. And then last year, they started disappearing. This is actually a small version of what's a larger problem, with a whole series of venerable rigs disappearing, basically because they can't get parts. And there have been some discussions in a variety of venues on the greater problem, but the APRS Appliance is focused on Kenwood discontinuing these because they can't get the parts. And indeed, the design was old, et cetera, et cetera. So what we wanted was something that would be able to receive signals at least as well as a TM D710GA, that would be able to send signals as well as a Kenwood TM D710GA, and which could be readily assembled by an amateur. And there were a number of statements of, and please no soldering. And so we tried, and indeed it is feasible. We've developed an APRS appliance, we call it. It uses a software TNC, John WB2OSC's Direwolf. That was actually a critical design decision when we went with that. So whole series of people were involved, but I know that Jeff in particular was involved in helping make that decision. We use a Raspberry Pi. We use a sound card interface, and I'm going to go discuss that more. And the key design decision was to use the 6-pin mini DIN because it means we have a consistent interface. The levels are roughly constant, and it gave us access to the discriminator input and to direct FM output, or excuse me, modulator input and discriminator output. There we go. About 9 people, maybe more at this point, have replicated with about 5 variants. I think there are 12 or 13 of these that have been made. We'll discuss a few in a minute. It has superior reception of APRS packets to the D710GA. That's John WB2OSC who did that testing. And it's equal to or better transmission than the D710GA, and that was testing that was led by Jeff and one JCM, and I assisted. And we've used it at 1200 baud at 8 locations in 2022. A QEX article has been accepted. The editor's reviewing it now. We have a list of all of the various co-authors on it who contributed to the exercise. I have not been pushing the editor to get it into publication. I have been talking to him regularly, but I haven't been encouraging him because right now we can't get pies, and it probably behooves us not to have the article come out until the pie supply frees up some, which looks like it might happen this summer. That's what fingers crossed are going. So I'm not pushing them so that we don't get ourselves with a project that people can't build. And these are the devices. And let me stop sharing. The original version used a Pi 3. It used a Dyna. I couldn't find the original version used by a Dyna interface from Steve N8BAR. You plug it in. You plug in a GPS. Connect it to a radio in your business. It just assembles with plugs. And that was the first version. That's the Mark I. That's the most common version that has been repeated. I know Jeff Martin has one. Tim has a variant, I believe. Jason has a variant. I've lost track right now of how many people have built it. Well, and John Tarbucks has one of these, I think, using a Pi 4. Jeff suggested we try and be able to do it with a Pi 0. The first one was a special purpose case structure, and I know at least one other person has duplicated it. It now is available as a commercial product. And again,
Don, what's the commercial aspect of it? Is the case, or?
It's a case and the expander board to go with Pi 0 2W or Pi
Okay.
0 But that means you can purchase it all, and now it becomes plug and play again. The third variant, the one I work on, uses a Pi 0 form factor Dyna. It was made especially for the AT Golden Packet. This is the one I use in the car, and it's got, now I can't open it up easily, but it's got a Dyna board, USB expansion board, and a Pi 0 in it. And this is the one I test in my house all the time. It's got the Dyna board. You can see the connector. It's got a USB expansion board. You can see the USB port. It's got a Pi 0 board. You can see the plugs. And then in the top, it has an integrated DPS unit. And so you don't need any connections. You just give it power and connect to a radio and you're done. Those are the 4 basic configurations, and then people have embroidered on them. Tim has used a different GPS. Jason, I believe, used a different sound card, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, it's been replicated with Pi's, Pi 3s and Pi 4s quite regularly. Any questions about the design? Okay. So how did it go? We have a working design, better performance than a D710, worked smoothly at 1200 baud. We had the following issues during the 2022 AT Golden Packet. Only 2 of the 9600 baud installations worked. The others failed for a variety of different reasons, most of them having to do with the transceiver. I know that's what killed me. My transceiver couldn't support 9600, even though the vendor said it could. And then we had some power supply failures. Based on that, if we practice and refine the 9600 baud and improve the power supplies to make sure we actually test the power supplies we're going to use in the field, seems like we ought to be able to smoothly support 1200 baud and 9600 baud in 2023. So that looks like it's what we could do if we wanted. To make it happen, we need to practice, 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 and practice with the actual system you are using. I know Lynn literally put a system in his car, set it so it would start up as soon as the car turned on, and I was watching him as his car was moving around, providing real-time continuous testing of the appliance. As far as I know, he never had it fail on him, but I haven't heard any feedback after the first few months.
As far as you know, I never did what?
Had any failures with it?
That is true. Once I put the, what are the clamps you put on wires to suppress the RF noise?
Oh, yes, ferrite beads.
Ferrite bead. Once I clamped a ferrite on the USB to the dyna, everything was rock solid.
Excellent.
And for anyone that thinks they might be having RFI, I was watching all the activity from the dyna sitting under the driver's seat, and it looked like every time it transmitted, the Pi was resetting. So on my next stop, I got it all working, and I literally reached down from the driver's seat, wrapped my hand around the dyna cable, and drove 30 miles with one hand and proved that all those transmissions went through and never killed the Pi. So then I clamped the bead on, and it's been rock solid since.
Yeah, what we found, at least in my testing, and I think people have been replicating, is all cables anywhere get ferrite beads on them. This system, I'll discuss that in the next level of development. This system is sensitive to RFI and a variety of other interference that can cause it to go unstable. It's a known issue actually with the Pi design. It's not unique to this, just that our dyna system and the GPS are particularly sensitive to it. So we got to be careful of that, but we got them all working so with the beads. All right, so I'm going to stop here for a moment. Any questions and thoughts on what else we should do?
I got a question about dyna.
Sure.
Okay. Jumper JP1.
JP3.
What's that?
Jumper JP3 is that the one you're referring to?
No, JP1.
Oh, JP1.
Yeah.
That's the one that
Because,
does 96 versus 1200.
Yeah, because I think dyna comes, if I'm not right, maybe you can clear this up for me, comes for 1200 baud.
Yes, it
And then
does.
yeah, and you
and-
have to, what's that?
So, well, we'll talk about that in a minute.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, it comes for 1200 baud. The regular dyna, it's designed to change it by going in and literally cutting a jumper, and then putting a solder bead over the other jumper. I realized I didn't bring it. Well, I'll show approximately what it is. That's a real pain with the regular dyna. The dyna Z has a actual physical jumper, which you can move back and forth and reset, but it's inside the device, hard to get to. This isn't quite the cable, but it's close enough. Let's see, I'm trying to remember where we got these from, but there's a vendor that produces a crossover cable for 9600 baud to 1200 baud. And so what I've been doing is buying that cable. And if I want to switch to 9600 baud, I plug it into the Dyna, and it rewires the 1200 baud signal to the 9600 baud signal. And then you have to reset Direwolf to be 9600 baud. And I have instructions for doing this that I published and passed out last year, and we can republish again this year.
I've done a lot of testing using both the so-called 1200 9600 receiver outputs, and I've received both of them at the same time with the same signals.
Yep.
And at 12 with a 1200 baud signal, I did not see any difference in the decode numbers.
And that's the other alternative approach. Both work. Yeah, this is the actual cable. Right here. But both work. Either one works. You're going to have to change the sound levels when you go between 9600 baud and 1200 baud. Actually, you don't. If you're doing if both are going to the direct to the discriminator, you don't have to change the sound levels. I'm incorrect. Yeah.
So that would be a simplification.
Yeah, and both work, whichever one prefers. One of the things I call this is a meta design. It's not explicitly stating you must do it this way. It's a basic configuration that works. And as we've seen with people's tweaking of it, there are a lot of different implementations, but when we go back and look at the actual raw performance, as long as we're using Direwolf, that's key, and some version of the All-Star interface, this one's the Dyna, but there are a variety of others available. It looks like all the testing that's been done to date still remains valid. So you can use the cable crossover, or you can set everything at 1200 baud. It's your choice. Both work.
Another note when using the original Dyna, you need to cut the jumper that has the squelch.
Yeah, the COS jumper JP3 must be cut.
Because otherwise, it comes by default, it's connected, and if you don't cut it, whenever the squelch is tripped, it turns the transmit audio down.
Yeah, and eventually it'll shut it totally off in most operating systems. So it'll keep reducing the transmit volume until you get nothing. And then you got to go reset it, and then it'll move it down. So you got to cut JP3, or on the Dyna Z, you have to remove the JP3 jumper connector. And that's in the instructions. We do have a full set of instructions on this. I haven't received lots of feedback on that, but people should, as they're building things, should probably get back to me and tell me what errors are there. I think I'm going to go screen share, but I'm going to jump.
Actually, before we move on, Don, can I do a direct question for John? While we're talking about the 1200, 9600, John, is there a way that you could actually take the audio from a single radio source coming through like a Dyna into Direwolf and feed it to a 1200 baud and a 9600 baud decoder so that you could have a dual baud receiver? Now the transmit side is going to go 96 or 12, whatever it's configured as, but to actually set up a dual baud rate APRS receiver.
Yeah, with some ALSA trickery, where you would take the one signal with one input signal and then split it into two streams, so it would look like two different devices, and then you'd have configure two channels. So, and then each channel would decode its own rate, and then it could then retransmit at its own rate, or you could retransmit at both rates, sequentially.
Yeah, that would be tricky to synchronize so that only one is actually making it through the dyna. But what I was thinking about that for is to have a single receiver sitting somewhere that's decoding both baud rates from a single radio, and then take the source and run it at 1200 from a location and 9600 from the same location, and move around, do signal suppression, whatever you need to do to test and verify what coverage you get from 9600 baud and what coverage you get from 1200 baud.
Mhm.
And that way the receiver is a constant. So just a thought. Might
Yeah,
be fun to try.
I didn't explain it too well. I'll have to write up a message explaining it in more detail with pictures.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool. I would appreciate that. Okay, back to you, Don.
No problem. All right, so this is what I propose we do for the prep for 2023 ATGP. First, I typically try and do an OS build at regular intervals, just to make sure the build instructions work, that they haven't changed anything somewhere that screws everything up. And furthermore, right now we're using root as the account. We really should be using a service account, probably Direwolf, unless John tells me that's a bad service account to use. So what I plan to do in February 2023 is do an OS build and build it. It's really three things that have to change. Build it so we use the Direwolf service account as opposed to root, as just as a security precaution. So that's something I'm planning to do by February. Second, when we do the Mark III, if you look carefully, I took a shortcut and used spacers that come with the USB hub, which has got these pogo connectors on them. And the spacer has to be 10 millimeters if you want it to work right. They came with 10 millimeters, so I used them because I didn't have 10 millimeters in the rest of the hardware. And the only problem is that the spacers provided at 10 millimeters are steel and the rest of the spacers are brass. And I got stress corrosion cracking. So I've got it, I'm going to update the instructions to use all brass spacers. I have that running right now. It costs $8 more. And I'm going to publish the updated Mark III instructions later this month because I already have it running. I know it works. So those are two quick tweaks. I'll go back to shortly to some other things we could do as well. All the other participants need to build or refine their APRS appliances if they're going to use them. And you need to test it with the power supply and transceivers you plan to use. And you want this all working by the end of January, so you've got some test time. So that's a real thing that people need to do in the next few weeks is go polish their designs and start using them. You should test at home at 1200 baud, which many of us can do because there's 1200 baud infrastructure around. And what last year showed is we really need to test at 9600 baud. The way I do that is I have a D72 and the appliance. I actually have a 710 running, so I got three things, and I test that way. I'm not sure how to make this easier for most people. You got to have two 9600 baud systems because there's no 9600 baud infrastructure. So the best I've come up with is a 9600 baud APRS unit, D72 or a 710, and the appliance, and cross test to make sure they work. Does anyone else have better ideas? Okay.
It's all sounding great.
And then the next thing is, it's really good to field test these. Last year, the New England team met at Nearfest, which I think towards the end of February, if I remember right. And
Yeah, maybe you could add that date onto the slide before you publish it.
all right, I'll add that date. Yeah, I can go check. we got together at Nearfest. Everybody brought their systems. We brought them all up and we showed they all cross-worked. And if you know, the systems in the northern end, well, most of the systems were in the northern end, ones that were cross-checked had fewer problems. It wasn't zero. One of the things we didn't do at Nearfest is check 9,600 baud, so we can check that next year or this coming year. But yeah, we found that thing helped solidify the devices. So this looks like the work effort or the work packages for those who are planning to use the appliance for 2023. Am I missing anything that people think we ought to be doing?
I just checked Nearfest. That's April 28th and 29th. So we might like to do a test before that in New England, if there's some gathering we could find. But in addition to Nearfest, not in lieu of.
All right. Yeah.
What dates did you
it'd be
say it
nice
was?
to do it earlier in April.
Oh, April 28th.
April 28th and 29th is Nearfest.
I'm gonna mark it on the golden packet calendar.
I know in March in Maine, we have the ARRL State Convention. I don't know when New Hampshire has theirs. It might be an opportunity to get together.
All right. But we found that Nearfest was absolutely critical to getting everything working last year. So unless someone has some major changes, this seems like the work efforts, minimum work efforts required to get us up and working cleanly with 9,600 baud this time for 2023 AT Golden Packet. Any other suggestions of what we need to add? No. All right. Now, there are also a lot of things we could do. Because we have a working system. We can get it working cleaner, better, etc. The service account, I'm just going to do that. It'd be interesting if people are interested to look at whether we should continue to use the screen function to monitor the system. The alternate is to write a log file and tail the log file. That works. I've actually tested it. I'm not sure which is better. I will say the log file is always going to be ephemeral. It's an in-memory file. So because if we don't, we risk the OS the way we're structured. The OS requires, is set up so it never writes to the disk. But if someone were interested in exploring that and coming back with a recommendation, that's a task.
If you have a spare USB port, you could stick in a USB flash drive and write your log there.
Yeah, and there is on most of the systems one spare or many of the systems one spare USB port. Yeah. Although, yeah, that would work. So I'd say all right. If someone's really gallant, there are some amusements with the GPSD daemon, which is the interface we use to talk to the GPS units. John Langner is very familiar with this situation. To make it work, I took a version of the GPSD. John did a fair amount of polishing to get that version working cleanly with Direwolf. And we have an installation instructions for using that particular GPSD image on the appliance. If someone had the courage, they could try and work with the GPSD team, because we're about 2 rows behind, and see if we can make Direwolf work with the latest GPSD. There are some amusements with the GPSD Demon team in their objectives, so they keep breaking backwards compatibility. And the alternate that Tarbucks and I discussed is maybe we need to get a different GPSD path than using the present official GPSD team. But there's problems here if people are interested. Otherwise, we'll just keep using the image because that works.
Don,
Go ahead.
it's worth noting that for the Appalachian Trail Golden Packet, we're not walking around or driving around, we're at fixed locations. So you technically don't need a GPS.
Yep, you could hardwire it in. What we do, however, is we watch people as they're going to the location, and for that, you do need a GPS.
Have we considered connecting a smartphone to the device and using the GPS on the smartphone for positioning?
No one's looked at that option. There's an interesting communication path issue that might be challenging there,
Right.
but
But it
nobody's
is an
looked at it.
option. It's an option.
It's something to look at. I've got some concerns about doing that, but those are subjective concerns, and an objective test always trumps subjective concerns. Go ahead. We could build a simple web interface that allows us to configure Direwolf on the fly and then send a restart signal to it. So we don't have to use text editors to modify it or to change its behavior. We've talked about that in the past. It would be a very light web interface. I would recommend that what we do is we actually edit the file as opposed to use multiple different direwolf.conf files, but it's a project one could look at. Talked with John Tarbucks about improved monitoring and status. Right now we SSH to the appliance. I typically run CGPS and attach to the screen from Direwolf so that I can see everything that's going on. And then I typically attach APRS IS32 to it via the TCP/IP socket. That's how I monitor it. It's a bit clunky. John has suggested putting a monitor on it. In fact, there's some relatively low-cost HDMI monitors, which probably could be mounted directly on it, and we can use everything pretty much out of the box if we went that way. The other is that you can actually monitor the entire performance of the system using the LEDs, and we can talk about having a bank of LEDs providing the status. Someone would need to look at that and decide what is the one that they'd be interested in pursuing. It's probably useful to do a deep dive in RFI shielding because that's one of the areas where we get measurable weakness in the system. The GPS needs to be shielded in particular. And the excuse me, and the USB and the Dynaboard need to be shielded so they don't get RFI or interference from the Pi. That's a fair amount of engineering effort, but it's probably worth it. There's a minor problem that we have to make sure that the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth get out. So the shielding has to not block that, but that's a project. Following that, support for Bluetooth. I believe, Lynn, you've said you've got Bluetooth on a serial connection already working using John's instructions. Is that true?
I do. It's KISS over Bluetooth, and John had the instructions to tell Direwolf how to poll for that port to appear. And you'd still have to go in and manually pair your client device to the Pi, which the Pi is, of course, the server side of this SPP. I did this from my Android APRS client, and there's no reason it would not work with a Bluetooth equipped Windows laptop for APRS IS32 to access it that way. But it would not work on any iPhones because it is strictly the SPP, the serial port profile, and not the Bluetooth low energy, which is the only thing supported Bluetooth wise by Apple iOS.
So I'm probably going to close with you in the back and do some testing. And in the February build, I'm going to build the Bluetooth SPP in there. So it's just there. I do want to check it because last time I did that, I couldn't make it to work, but I was probably be doing something stupid. But that leaves a Bluetooth low energy effort. I have no idea how much work that is. Probably wouldn't be a lot of money. But without that, then the iOS devices have to connect over a TCP socket rather than Bluetooth, and that has some interesting network implications.
Don, I'm going to bring up a sensitive topic, but I mean, why don't we just take all of your configs and simplify, just like rip all the crap out of DigiPi that we don't need, because everything that you're talking about is already there.
Yeah, so so DigiPi does not support the 1.7.
No, that's what I'm saying. Like we can change it, right? We can put 1.7 on.
Yeah, and so and if we can add that as a project.
Yeah, so
I
I'm saying
did a version of that.
GPSD is already there. There's already a web
Yeah, it's the
interface.
wrong
It's already got
GPSD.
Bluetooth support.
Yeah, so that's the problem I had when I talked to Craig, is he wouldn't use the GPSD that was stable, and he wouldn't use 1.7. So we're gonna
Yeah,
have to
and
build our own.
he still won't, but he said we can take it and do it whatever we want with it. So I'm not looking for him to support it. I'm just looking to build an image that's for us.
Yeah, so if someone's interested, we can build a DigiPi image. I actually did build a DigiPi image at one point, but I got so wrapped around an axle with conversations with Chris that I gave up on that. But if someone wants to do it,
Yeah, I might run with that.
all right.
And Jeff, I'd like to help you out on that too.
Who is that? Carlton? Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
I
Okay.
do a lot with the DigiPi, and it works on so many levels. And then you can increase that web interface so you can switch between the 12 and 9600. And put
Yeah.
those all.
Yeah, I mean, you can literally just take two of the slots that are already there and hide all the rest of them.
Yeah, and APRS Droid works with it very well. So.
All right, so DigiPi image, we'll add it to the list. I'm hearing Jeff, and who was the other person talking about that?
Carlton.
Carlton?
Yeah, KE4BML.
Okay, so I'll put you down as maybe. The other thing that needs to happen is this design is built around the audio chain, and we use the 6-pin mini DIN, which is basically a hardware transceiver artifact, to provide standardization and access to the deviator and modulator directly. We need to figure out how to do this with SDR radios. Technically, there's no reason why it shouldn't work. But last I checked, most SDR radios presumed a pure voice type audio input and did not support the features required to be able to get 9600 God to work.
Yeah, so I actually tried experimenting with that a little bit last year because I have an SDR play.
Yep.
And I wanted to use that for the iGate functionality last year, and I had it working solidly for 1200, but it would not for 9600.
Yep.
And I had enough other things on my plate. I just didn't have time to really deep dive into it. But It took me a while to figure out because it uses IQ audio. It doesn't even like provide like a traditional audio stream like you would get with a Dyna. So the device is not addressable through ALSA. I forget, I actually wrote a document on how I set everything up. I'll have to dig it up, but I documented everything right when I finished it, so I didn't lose it all.
Excellent. Yeah, I'd love to see that documentation.
Yeah.
'Cause to be
Not a
honest,
problem.
I think we need to understand how to crack this problem. I think this is critical moving forward because we're watching the monolithic transceivers slowly disappear as people can't get parts.
Jeff, your new DX10 does 2 meters, correct?
No, it's a HF and 6 meter only.
Oh, okay. For some reason, I think thought it also did 2 meters. Never mind.
So these are the projects I sort of have on my list. Do people have other things they'd like to see pursued?
Oh, I have a question for you, Don.
Sure.
The audio interface we use is very similar to the $4 ones you can buy on Amazon, except the $4 ones don't have push to talk, right?
Yeah, so let's be a little more precise. They are identical in the fundamental chip for the $15 ones that you buy on Amazon based on the CM108. And I think I provided instructions I found on the web of how to take one of those fobs and make it perform exactly like the Dyna. It's the all-star interface. There's instructions for it. It's finicky, but it can be done. So that's one approach.
Well, the approach I was thinking is if the no soldering approach, if you
Yep.
take that, does that handle everything but the push to talk?
Yep. Yeah. The thing that Dyna does is provides a push to talk via a GPIO pin on the sound card.
But couldn't we take a GPIO pin on the Pi with a
You
relay?
absolutely can. And indeed, if you look at the DigiPi, that's how they get their push to talk signal is from that.
Right, so that might be another option worth looking into. Because it would substantially reduce the cost and allow you to just use readily available, cheap USB sound interfaces.
Yeah, and the DigiPi uses the FEI sound card. And
Yeah, but we can, so
Mm.
I've had the conversation with Craig. You can use a variety of sound cards because Jason, I believe, used one of the I2Cs, I guess they're called sound cards, and made it all work. There's nothing specific about the sound card as long as you can have up to 8 kilohertz bandpass without any roll off. That's what it's required. That's a measured number, actually. That's not a theoretical one. That was a guy actually measuring the performance required to get 9600 baud working. So there are a variety of things we can do here. Let's see. And again, here, the cost, the effort. Cost, it turns out when you put everything together, the cost is going to be about $20. Because you got to buy all of this stuff and you're going to have to put it in something. You're going to need a transistor and a couple of resistors and cables and junk. So, but yeah, that's a project that could be done. And then we have a non-all-star interface that provides the same basic behavior. Now, the interesting thing is there are lots of these projects, unless someone volunteers to do them, nothing will happen on them. So I've got this list. I'm going to be seeing what people are interested in doing. And I'm interested in doing some of these, but I've only got this much bandwidth. I don't have that much. But if we have volunteers, anyone who's interested in volunteering for each of these, each of these would be a step change in the performance of the appliance and making it more general, more stable.
Yep.
So looking for volunteers, and we'll get to that question in a minute. I'm going to reverse the order of these two slides because there are other musings. One of the things I've made sure is that this particular thing is purely in the public domain. Anyone who wants to build one can. There's no limits on it. But the question comes, it would be interesting to try and get a vendor to provide this thing as a turnkey. The Kits for Hams person, Steve, N8AR, has expressed some interest, and I keep pinging him to see if he's still interested at the moment. What are people's thoughts on getting a commercial source for this?
Have somebody build kits for us, or
Build kits, not just for us, for general use. Right now, after a whole series of things, the APRS market is in very tough shape in terms of product.
yeah, it is.
So this is a thing which is fairly general, relatively cheap, all things considered,
Hmm.
that can fill that void. And the question, well, what I've already talked to Steve, N8AR, is to take his Shari and expand it. So his Shari is a small digital transceiver.
Yep.
It's got an onboard dyna, add an onboard set of USB ports, add a second Wi-Fi access point, and if you want, add a GPS, and you can make a board 3x3, some number like that. It's not too big, 9 square inches is enough for all of it. So I've been trying to see if he's interested in doing that.
I think it's a great idea.
All right, because then what you've got is this thing that you put a battery pack on, and you've got a portable tracking unit that can walk with you. And oh, by the way, if you wanted to send messages, pull out your cell phone, connect to it, and you can send and receive APRS messages from it.
Yeah, but the guys at Mobile Links can't keep those things in stock, so.
Yeah. That's the guys who made the crossover cable. Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really nifty device. It would be nice if they were available. I wouldn't mind trying one of those during the event too, just to have yet another option, but can't get them.
You can't get Mobile Link?
They've been out of stock for months.
Do they do 9600 baud? I think they're 12 only, aren't they?
Are they 12 only?
I think so.
Yeah,
I've
okay.
got- I've
I'm
got-
not positive, but I'm pretty sure. But it does.
Oh, yes,
do
they
BL.
are, and they do some funky things. But
Yeah.
yeah, they're a 1200 only.
They do BLE though. They do the Bluetooth low energy.
Yep. I've also thought of, after the paper comes out, I'll be blunt, going back to Kenwood and saying, rather than your special purpose thing for your head, here's a general purpose thing. Would you be willing to even think about bringing the D800 out that is generalized like this? But I don't want to make that outreach until the paper's out.
Yeah, we really need to have a display before we go there with Kenwood.
Okay. Good point. And the other project we've been beating around with is standardization test suite reference implementation for APRS. We've talked about this on and off. As we saw this last year, much of APRS implementation details are tribal knowledge, and there is no test suite to say you got it right. There are some tests, there are some standards. The standards are a little loose and people don't fully understand them. And so having a reference implementation with test suite so that, oh yeah, this is one that'll cross-operate with the other systems might be useful. So that's a musing. And any other musings that people thought that we might, build meta structures on top of this project?
I have something that's not specific to this project, but is kind of along the lines of what you were talking about before with Kenwood.
Go ahead.
I had this like crazy thought that combined with your article and the Golden Packet event and the fact that Dayton's coming up in May,
Mhm.
I have this funny feeling like Kenwood is going to announce something this year.
Mhm.
And just given the the lineage of this event and its ties to Bob and the fact that Golden Packet and the appliance are going to be called out in the article, it's like all the timing seems to be right to reach out to Kenwood and make them aware of the Golden Packet. I mean, imagine what kind of like a launch event that could be for Kenwood, right? To have their
Sure.
name on and be associated within the ham community.
Yep. That is
Yeah.
an excellent idea.
And they might want to sponsor us. If they have a brand new radio, they could loan us some. and we
Oh yeah, it would
test-
be perfect for road testing it. Yeah.
Right, now that would be great publicity for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So when they took out the full page ad on the back of QRZ magazine to honor Bob over the summer, I think they had one of the names of one of their senior VPs for the amateur radio division of Kenwood, and I was thinking about reaching out, finding out who his assistant is, and seeing if we could reach out through that.
Yeah.
But I think this is, we could be embarking. Who knows? They may not do anything. They may just say, you know what, it's not hurting us to not be involved in this business, and we're just gonna bow out of it. But I watched the guy Naz on his YouTube channel the other night. He did a whole thing about how APRS is his favorite digital mode for UHF VHF. And he had 3 radios. He had a D72, a D74, and a Yaesu FT5DR. And he's like, these 2 Kenwoods, he says, you can't get them anymore. He says, and they're worth a small fortune. He says, are they worth it? Because, are they that much better? And he's like, yeah, they really are. He says that there's nothing like them. And the fact that Kenwood's not making them anymore is a real problem.
Yep.
But I think this appliance is, word needs to get out about how well this works and in that it's even better, right? So.
Yep. And it has the advantage that furthermore, it's trivial to upgrade as we learn how to do things better.
Well, and when did the D710G come out? 2013?
That sounds right.
So, yeah, so so 10 years old, right? 10-year-old technology.
And the only thing about the G was the GPS.
The GPS, right?
The 710A has been out longer than that, right?
Yep.
Yep.
Amazing.
Can you ask them to put a web server in the head of their new product?
Well,
Yeah,
indeed, one of the things you can do is reduce the costs of your unit by not putting a display on it and having an app on your smartphone. So I've got all sorts of products at home that I have taken that path. So
Not, I will say this though, what makes me the most worried is that, maybe Kenwood does announce something and APRS is just not part of it at all.
yeah, that's why the second bullet was to try and see if we could explain to them that there's a flexible, relatively inexpensive way for them to do this. That was the intent of the second bullet.
Yeah, even this guy Naz the other night, he said, he's like, Yaesu, please, make your TNC addressable from other devices because you're missing a huge thing. And he's like,
Yep.
oh, by the way, ICOM, don't forget APRS is out here and nobody's using DPRS. So
Yeah, no.
let's get with the program sort of thing.
Yep.
So if one comment here, Don, we have a basic functional appliance at work.
Yep.
What we took out last year, right?
Yep.
Maybe some software updates on it, but that hardware works. and we look at it and we say, gee, it would be nice to like have a display, have it work with APRS ASI, and there's a lot of things we'd like to do. So by way of specific things, like I know I can throw an HDMI display on the Pi. And I don't know if everybody can see this. It looks like a notebook
Yeah,
and it sits up, and this is a little USB powered, runs
Mhm.
on a 3 amps off 5 volts, 15-inch full HDMI display that I picked up for $60.
Mhm.
So to me, if I said, gee, we could make some LEDs on there and it would show me status lights, well, I already have that thing.
Yep.
If the use case was one person, I'd slap that on any Pi and have a display. For somebody that does summits on the air and wants to spot from the top of a mountain, to tell him to lug this in his backpack, he's going to be like, no way, I need something super light. So I think there are a bunch of different use cases here, and it's easy to envision 57 variants of the APRS appliance, but we can't go down all the paths, right?
Yeah, well, so the more correct statement is that any given dedicated team can't go down all paths. But as we've already seen, Tim used a different GPS, and I said, there's no reason why it won't work. And he had to tweak with GPS-D to make it work, because he had to specify the I2C port, I guess it was. But and Jason used a different sound card, and they both worked. What we've got is a core right
Yes,
here,
but
which
part of
is-
that, part of
which
that,
is this is the stuff that we've got as our core. And if you're in this space, we know how to help you make it work.
Don, is it's sort of like if I go get a Windows laptop and I say I need a printer, I say it works, my laptop will work with any supported printer, right?
Yep.
Because that's a Windows problem.
Yep.
Essentially, we could say the same thing is if your GPS works with Raspberry Pis, Raspbian, great, get any GPS that works.
We can already say that.
Right. So we don't really want to be in the business of saying, well, we have this GPS with this software and that GPS with some other.
Yep.
That's a problem. We don't want to, that should not be our problem. And I think the idea of, if you have a phone and you connect the phone with a message supported on the Pi, be it Bluetooth, be it Wi-Fi, and that you can SSH in, that's a lot of people will like that as a solution because they can use a tablet, they can use any smartphone, right? So I think these general solutions. As for Kenwood coming out with something there, Jeff, if Kenwood comes out with something that's not APRS, I think they're just going to be out to lunch because every one of these soda guys that wants to spot, that just means they won't be looking at Kenwood.
Yeah, the question is, what do they look at? Because the market's getting really thin right now.
It is.
Right.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's basically gotten to the point now where it's like, roll your own or don't.
Right, but if we get a very simple, rugged appliance,
Mhm.
not much different than what we took to the mountains last year. Like a Pi Zero W with the shells on it, what you were holding up earlier, as a reference implementation, get somebody to make them commercially in a waterproof case. And so we can say, here it is, you can build it yourself, or you can buy it from this guy over here. And if anybody else wants to compete and make them, great, go ahead.
Yep.
Yeah, and I took this and taped it to my FT817,
Right,
and then I took it on a hike.
right.
Yeah. Okay. There's one last slide to get to because there's other things. The next question is, should we spin this off as its own separate project, or should we leave it within the ATGP? I'm sort of interested in people's thoughts here. It's clearly got potential beyond just the golden packet, but it's a piece, it's this germination out of the golden packet. So what are people's thoughts? Should we set it up so that it can stand on its own, or do we want to keep it within the AT golden packet space?
I'll be the first one to throw something out on the table. If we keep it in AT Golden Packet space, the groups.io limitations can come in to bite us if it really gets popular in the APRS community, because that'll cause an influx of people that have no interest in ATGP that are only there for the appliance. So on your second point, an independent groups.io group might be a good idea for that reason.
I will say though, that if you, and this is just education on groups.io, right, is that if you were part of groups.io before they came out with the current set of plans, you get grandfathered in, or you got grandfathered in so that you have benefits that people who sign up for new free accounts today don't get. So I just say that if you do explore groups.io, just make sure you do a good, close, hard investigation as to what you get in the free plan versus having to step up, because there's other platforms that are out there that I think are better than groups.io at this point.
Go for it. What others?
I don't. I have a list of them that I've looked at in the past. I'll pull them for you.
Yeah, why don't you send that out to the
Yeah,
team?
I mean, groups.io is nice because there's like 0 ads on it, right? I mean, they somehow or another, they've been able to keep it that way for a long time, and they don't make a whole lot of money. You know, I think it's just what we all go to because we know it, and you know, we're most familiar with it. There's a couple that are out. There's one that's out there. I'm trying to remember the name of it right off the top of my head. That's just ham radio related. They're kind of a small player. I mean, you almost have a better chance of doing it like similar to like what APRS SIG is doing by having like a mail list server.
Yeah.
We're
I like
kind of down in the weeds on this about which platform we use for discussions.
Yeah,
I think the bigger question is the project itself.
it's out. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, like, don't feel bad like that I'm going to be heard about, because like I think it's bigger than the golden packet, right? We use it for what it's capable of, but it's got bigger.
Yeah.
It
Right.
has much more applicability than golden packet.
I agree with you, Jeff. I think in the future, it needs to be stood up like a full-blown open source project, because there's open source hardware as well, right? My immediate concern is when we get on this call this month, we don't have a lot of distraction and noise because everyone here has been brought up to speed. We all have a common goal. We have the expertise here.
Mhm.
A lot of open source projects, you're gonna have people with vested interests. If we really open this up, there's gonna be some hacker from Iran that wants to come in and corrupt the source code to use it for, I don't know, the Bitcoin mining, and some other guy in China that wants to change the APRS spec. I mean, I can see this really getting away from us if we just totally throw the doors open at this point.
Well,
Right
so-
now, it's really good because you get input from John, you get input from, the people here in our group who are, they're really knowledgeable. You know what I'm
Well,
saying?
we
So
need
I
to
think
get a
at
handle
least
for
through
2
summer
points.
would be good to keep
2
it.
points. The software itself is predominantly Direwolf,
Right.
and that's already controlled in GitHub. So nobody can seriously corrupt what we're doing, because it's already got a GitHub source code control on it. So I'm not too worried about people subverting it. The thing is, we need to make this decision soonish, because if it's going to get its own space, we need to get that into the article.
Okay, fair
Okay.
point. You could announce that that's the intent, right?
Like, announce the intent, but if the article goes out with only AT Golden Packet space, then everybody's going to go to the AT Golden Packet APRS project piece.
Right.
For the
I get you.
extended period.
The issue is we need a web address to publish.
Yeah, we need it's a whole set of things, but is it time now to put in the effort to be able to allow this to stand on its own? And I'm sort of hearing it probably is, but it wasn't a clarion's bell ringing saying that must happen.
No,
now.
I think it should be, and I agree with you. I mean, if you're gonna do it, I mean, have the platform that you're gonna do it based on picked out, ready to go. I mean, you could even just use like Google Groups as a great platform. That was I don't know why I didn't think of that. That was the one that I was actually wanting to switch us over to not long after we were already on groups.io, because they had it was a better platform from my standpoint and easier to work with. It was also free. It had a lot more capabilities, better performance, but you know,
And I'm going to scope this out over the next month, and I will be exposing where it's going and look for input back and forth. I'd really, if we're going to go make this happen, it sort of needs to have enough of it happen by the end of February, so we make sure it gets into the article. Because right now the article links are all going to the APRS projects portion of AT Golden Packet.
oh
Isn't GitHub the sort of default for open source projects?
Yeah, be careful with GitHub. It's got some interesting behavior. It's a source code control thing predominantly. I think we may need a GitHub side eventually, but it's going to play a very odd role.
Right, aren't there open source hardware projects on GitHub?
Not that
And it's like issue tracking and bug tracking.
Yeah, there's all things you can do with it. The big thing though is it's doing the diffs on the source code and maintaining the source code history. That's what it does really well.
Right.
But yeah, GitHub would do a number of things for us. It just wouldn't be the primary thing, in my opinion, based on my tweaking it. I actually looked earlier to see if we could use Git for everything for the clients. I did that, and it won't. It won't, literally won't, for a whole set of technical reasons. All right, I'll start to work on it. I will expose everything that I'm coming up with for feedback and thoughts. And I won't do anything until we've got consensus from the team here.
Right. My one thought, though, is if we publish an address and somebody says, you know, great, I read the article, I got a Raspberry Pi, I want to build this thing. They want to go to that address and get the software, right?
Yeah, okay.
Well, you don't go to a Google group and get software, right?
No, there are layers here. And I'm not going to go into them now. It turns out none of these can store the images cleanly. If you look carefully, the images are all stored on Google Drive. And I have the image, so it's read accessible if you have the link. And then it's on my Google Drive.
Doesn't GitHub store images?
No, it will not store. We need about 1.5 gigs, and it won't store anything that large. I tried.
Okay. But John, you do everything on GitHub for Direwolf, don't you?
Correct.
The size of that project though is tiny in comparison.
So I'm storing the image.
He's got the whole ISO, yeah, the whole ISO, whole operating system, almost 2 gigs.
I hear you. Sure, I hear you.
Okay. And I tried putting it in GitHub. It will not fit.
Right.
Okay. We're down in the weeds. This is generally probably appropriate, and I will start working to produce more structured proposals for consideration. And I won't do anything without consulting with everyone and getting consensus. All right, that's the end of what I got.
Does SourceForge do that?
I'm not sure I understand.
I don't know. I haven't looked at SourceForge.
Yeah,
I don't know if
you
source
check
forge
it out. I
does large
just-
things or not.
yeah,
I don't know.
just a thought.
All right, the first level is, this is probably not inappropriate, and actual proposals, of which the first thing is going to be to go get a DNS name for this thing. That's the first step, and then start having it point to the right spots. All right, I'll get something out in the next bit. I thank you all for the time.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. Great call. I'm going to stop the recording here.